Well, in this lesson, we're going to use multi-resolution modifier to sculpt details and then bake the details on normal maps. Before doing anything, you might want to duplicate this blend file and take a copy. And one thing I'd like to mention before starting the lesson, if you go to shading and see a pink color, that means you lost the textures. You can open the textures and load them from wherever you saved them. And ideally save all those textures just next to the blend file and keep all of that in one folder. All the textures in a texture folder, and the texture folder should sit next to the blend file, and all this should be inside a folder called my project or my character, however you want. Now first we will start with the face. Let's go to modifiers, add multi-resolution modifier, subdivide it a couple of times. 4 levels of subdivision, I think that's enough. I just want to enhance the details around the eyes, and that's all. Let's hide the hair and eyelashes. I'd like to focus on the eyes. By pressing Shift S, you can enable stabilize stroke. We might want to enhance the details around the ears. So that's all about the head. Now we can move to other objects. Let's go to layout. We can also enhance the nails on the hands. So let's apply multi-resolution modifier. And as you noticed here, multi-res modifier normally stays before other modifiers. So that's expected, and you shouldn't change the order. If it was an other modifier, it would go after mirror modifier, but multi-res normally goes before other modifiers. Go to sculpting. I will simply enhance the nails, but you can, for example, create some wrinkles here or some other shapes. You can create, for example, a scar or something. So it's totally up to you. Now I think they are looking much better. We can move on with the next object. Now it's time to give some details to clothes. We will create a few wrinkles and folds. For clothes, I think we probably need to turn off X-axis mirror because it will be too visible. So we want the patterns to look unique. Here you can see suddenly most part of the shirt is already sculpted. Well, I lost this part of the video recording because of power failure, but you haven't missed anything actually. I only used one crease brush, and sometimes I hold down Control for folds, other times simply sculpt for creases. So I think we are done with the shirt. Now we can move on to the trousers. Let's continue with the trousers. We will make much less folds and stuff in the trousers. I think I'll have to hide the hands. Now I think we are done with the trousers. We can move on to do something with the shoes. Let's go ahead and apply multi-resolution modifier, subdivide a bunch of times. 4 subdivisions are enough for this, I guess. Let's go to sculpting. And before going to the next lesson, we have a challenge for you, and you already know what the challenge is. You're going to do exactly the same things as I did here, sculpt all these details, and take a screenshot and share your work on our Discord community server. You can find it by following the link in the resources section of the last video, the bonus section, and I'll see you in the next lesson. In this video, we're going to bake the details that we created using sculpting on texture maps. So let's go to shading. We'll start with the face or with the skin textures. We'll bake the normal map and maybe ambient occlusion map. Let's get a new window so that we can see the texture. Image editor. This is the body color texture. We don't need this color texture. I now noticed that I created all the textures in 4K. Actually, for the eyes and small details, we didn't have to have 4K texture, but let's leave like that and create the normal map for body texture. Let's go. We will select this texture so that it is an active texture. Now we can select all the objects by pressing Shift L, select objects by material, and you can see all these objects are selected. We can bake the details on multiple objects in this way by selecting all of them. So let's go to Render Properties, Bake from Multi-Resolution and Normals. Again, don't forget to bring down the level viewport to 0 before baking on all these objects. Go to Bake menu. Now we can hit Bake, but we have a problem. All our objects have multi-resolution modifier, but I think the problem is with the mirror modifier. We can temporarily disable it or even get rid of that. and I hope it works now. Let's go back to bake. We should select both and let's hit bake. The details are baked very well. We need to save this image now before we lose it. Let's bake the details on the clothes. Shift L, select by material. We need to create a new image. So we load the closed normal image here too. Render properties. Again, I think we have to disable the mirror modifier on the shoes because Blender will complain if we don't do that. Bake menu and hit bake. So we don't have a nice normal map, it's a plain color, so there is something wrong here. Oh yeah, we forgot to bring down the levels viewport to 0. That's why it didn't bake nothing. We can try again. Now we have all these nice details on our normal map. Let's save it. Now we are going to bake ambient occlusion and curvature maps. For the body, we only need to bake ambient occlusion, I believe, to enhance the details a bit better. And I think we can get away with 2K here. It's better to have consistent size across the textures, but keeping textures lower resolution will save some memory. So let's go to rendering actually, and bring in ambient occlusion node, see what it will do. And in order for this to work better, we will plug in the normal map here. Shift A, normal map, plug this into material and also plug this into the ambient occlusion, and we will have these little details here around the eyes. Now we can increase the contrast on the ambient occlusion details. We will play with the distance too using color ramp. Also change the distance, bring down the distance again so that the hair doesn't affect too much, and we can enhance the details without the hair much better, I believe. I think this is okay. Now we can bring in an emission shader, select the newly created ambient occlusion texture, and we will bake the emission. So it still took into account the hair, so we need to hide the hair from render view and bake it again. Now the shadows from the hair is gone. We can save this image, and we named the image wrong. We have to include the name of the material. Now we can save. We won't bake any other thing about the body. Let's move to the clothes. Let's plug the normal map in and see if it's really working, right? Of course it's working because we can see the details there. It's working like magic, as you can see. No problem here. Now let's create the image for ambient occlusion. It will be called clothes ambient occlusion. Now let's bring in the nodes from the body material. Let's see how they look. The details are too small. We can increase, I think, the distance. Well, we forgot to plug in the normal map. Now the effect is much more exaggerated. Yeah, I think we can bake this now. Bring in an emission node. Select the ambient occlusion texture and let's bake. It will bake all one by one. So yeah, that's it. Ambient occlusion map is ready. We can save it. Now we can bake clothes curvature map, which is the kind of opposite of ambient occlusion. We still use the same setup. Let's go to rendered view. Turn on inside to revert ambient occlusion effect. We will also flip the colors. Now I think we can bake the curvature map. Select the curvature map And let's hit bake. And I forgot to select all the objects. These 3 objects, they should be selected. They all need to be selected in order to bake them one by one. Well, we have baked the curvature map too. Now we can save it. So that was everything for this lesson. Now it's time for quick questions. The first question, why is naming the textures important? Well, if you don't name the textures properly, we can easily confuse them, and it's really hard to know which texture is for what material. That's why we need to name the textures after the name of materials. For example, let's say you name one texture just normal map, and you bake another texture. What will you call it? Normal map 2? And how would you know which texture is for which part of your mesh? So it's really important to name the textures after the materials, and the name of the materials should reflect what kind of object the material is for. So these are pretty important. The next question, how can you bake the details on multiple objects at once? Well, that was simple. After you set up baking for multiple objects, you need to select all of them. And this will allow you to bake the details on all of them in one click. The next question, why did baking multi-resolution details not start when we first tried? If you remember, when we first tried to bake after we set up everything, the baking didn't start because of another modifier in one of the objects. And multi-resolution is a kind of special modifier which doesn't like other modifiers which are actively changing the geometry. So we disabled the mirror modifier and the baking worked normally. So that was all for this lesson. See you in the next one. In this lesson, we're going to paint the face textures of our character. Before painting, we really need to look at some reference images. These are all AI generated. You can get some idea of how the skin tone changes around the areas of the face. There are some highlights, some darker areas, and we will constantly look at the reference images while painting. So please open the reference images on your smartphone or the second screen. You can look at more realistic images, and you will see the same patterns, the same highlights and darker areas. And remember, we are using all these images for reference purposes only. Before we paint, we will create a color palette. We will select some colors from a reference image. Let's go to color palette, create new, call it skin color or something, and bring in a reference image. I will leave that for you too. So this is our little color palette. We will select the second row colors and create a little color palette. Let's go take the color picker. This is the highlight or the lighter version. And I will copy all of these. So we have selected all the colors. Now we will fill the entire skin with a simple color, and we will create some highlights and darker areas by selecting other colors. Let's select the fill tool, select a color and fill. We will fill the hands too, Alt Q and fill it, and the little legs. That's all. And you might have noticed that the colors in my scene are looking quite flat because I'm using flight lighting option in viewport shading options. Normally it is in studio, but I chose flat to see the colors very well. And if you paint something, it's immediately noticeable, but in studio lighting option, it's barely noticeable. And you can also change the studio lighting option to paint, and this is much better for painting. And another advantage of flat, you can select the colors or you can sample the colors this way. You know that this is flat color, right? But if you try to sample, it's always different depending on where you sample. Sometimes it's darker, sometimes it's lighter. So you can't sample the color in the 3D scene in the studio lighting option. But if you change this to flat, the color is always the same and you can easily sample that. That's why sometimes it's better to change to flat. Now let me hide everything else and leave the face only. Shift H, go to painting. First, we will paint some highlights by selecting slightly lighter color and bringing down the strength. Also use a different brush. Shift spacebar, paint soft. You can enable and disable the symmetry option from time to time. If it's difficult to remove the highlights, just bring up the strength and remove them. Now let's paint some darker areas. You don't have to worry about the inconsistency in the color because human skin is very inconsistent and the colors are very imperfect. There is a lot of variation if you look at the human skin, so you don't have to worry about that. It doesn't have to be very plain and flat. Now we can go to edit mode and select the interior of the skin, like the parts which are not very visible. Press L and L here too. We will try to select this part. Select a darker color, change to fill mode, bring up the strength, enable the mask option here, and fill these areas. I hope it's not too dark. Let's go to blur option, disable mask option, and blur out the sharp edges. Now we can change the lips to a darker color. Select the fill tool, select the darker color, enable mask and fill it. Disable the mask and blur out the harsh lines here. Take the smear tool and remove these areas. Don't forget to save the texture from time to time. Now we can create the freckles. Select the brush, go to texture, create a new texture, call it freckles. Go to texture properties and we will use clouds. Enable color ramp. Let's change the noise to Voronoi F1, F2. In the color ramp, increase the black values, not too much I guess, and we need to change the scale to make it smaller. Maybe this is okay. Go back to the tool settings. We will use a darker color and increase the strength and paint with this texture. Let's see, but before painting let's change the mapping to random and the angle also random. Now you can see the freckles. I think we need to make a slight change to the upper lids. Let's remove this texture for now. Select a darker color, decrease the strength, enable symmetry and paint the top of the eyes. It's usually a bit darker. I think it's because of the shades that women use. We can also exaggerate the eyelashes by painting a slightly darker color behind it. Let's enable stabilize stroke by pressing Shift S. Well, we probably need to increase the strength to up to 1 and maybe select slightly less dark color. This doesn't look bad, I guess, but we will see. Maybe we will remove it. So that's it. Now it's a quick challenge for you. Please paint the texture of the face of the character. Make it however you want. Paint it in a more dark color or lighter color. It's totally up to you. But please finish painting the face of our character and share your work. You know where to share. So I will see you in the next lesson. In this lesson we are going to paint the smaller parts of our character, so let's hide other things. And I'm actually going to paint the eyebrows on the skin, so I'm going to remove eyebrows. We're not going to use mesh based eyebrows because they didn't fit quite well with, for example, what I'm going to do with the hair. It looks a bit more realistic, but the eyebrows are a little too cartoony, so I'm not going to use the eyebrows mesh. So anyway, let's start. Go to texture paint. We currently have this SM parts color texture, and I'm going to fill the inner mouth objects with plain color. Let's select this darker color and fill these objects. Alt Q. Select the white color and fill the teeth. That's all for these inner mouth objects. Let's save it. Go back to layout. We have two layers of the eye. I'm going to hide the outer part and paint the inner part. Press 1, go to texture paint. So let's use one texture that I have. I'm going to bring in a texture, not texture mask, a color texture here. We have a few options. Let's select this and see how this will look. We're going to use the stencil mapping option. Because it's stencil, we'll control it with right click. We'll move it with right click and shift right click to scale, control right click to rotate. Actually come closer, shift right click to scale it up. Make sure the strength is 100%, and to change the middle, we will scale it up. And see how this will look. I think it's looking quite good. Now we can paint the back with simple white part of this texture. I think it's better to paint it here. Make sure that you don't paint over these other objects, so we will be careful. Not bad. We don't have to paint the back area because it will never be visible. Everything else is fine for now. Go back to texture paint, save the texture. So we will deal with the outer part of the eye later. We will create a new material for that. For now we need to deal with the eyelashes. For this we will have to use an alpha texture. So let's create one alpha texture. SM parts alpha it will be called. 1K is fine. The color should be white because if it is black everything will be invisible. when we plug this into alpha. Now we will use a texture mask to kind of create the eyelashes shape. Select the eyelash object, go to texture paint. We don't need this texture. We will have to use a texture mask. I'm going to use this one. First of all, we will fill the eyelashes in dark color. Now we are going to use the brush with stencil mode. Because it's a texture mask, we need to control it with right click, but also holding down Alt. Don't forget to hold down Alt when you try to control this alpha mask. Hold down Alt and Control to rotate, Alt and Shift, and right click to scale. And as you can see, we have these nice eyelashes texture. We need to have more here, I think, in the middle. I think this is looking okay. Let's unhide everything and see how this looks. Now we're going to paint the eyebrows. Let's hide the eyebrows and see. We're going to paint it on the skin right here. We will need the eyebrows for a placeholder. Select these two. Shift H to hide everything else. Let's go to texture paint. We're going to use a texture mask. Let's create a texture mask. We call it brow or something. Let's bring in eyebrows texture. We have a few options. We have this nice set of eyebrows. We'll paint it with dark color, much darker than this. It's like that. This is stencil, so we're going to use Alt plus right click, Control Alt to rotate, Shift Alt to scale. We'll slightly move it. Just take a look. Yeah, this is looking quite good. I think we're going to leave this. Save the texture. So I think it's looking quite good, but we can change the roughness and separate it slightly. Let's try doing that. We'll create a color ramp, plug the color information, and let's see. So we need to flip this color. We will separate the eyebrows. So let's bring this here, just like that. Now we will change the colors and let's see the result. We plug this into roughness and now you can see we have slight variation in roughness. Now we are going to create a special material for the outer eye. It will be a glass-like material which will reflect the light around and it will make the eye look more like realistic eye. So let's remove this SM parts material from this, create a new material slot, remove this one, create new material. You can call it anything you want. Let's go to shading. We need to take a few steps to achieve that kind of look. First of all, we'll go to material properties in Principled BSDF and turn on transmission. You immediately see the effect. It's starting to look more like glass. We will bring down the roughness, 0.02 or something. And we can also play with the refraction value, 1.12 or something. We need to bring it down slightly. And the next step is to go to material settings and turn on ray trace transmission. And it starts to work. But there might be a few problems. We will fix them along the way. And if it didn't work, you need to make sure that you have ray tracing enabled in EV settings. And another thing that you need to be careful with is when you hide this, you have this inner eye object, and in the material settings for that, you shouldn't turn on ray trace transmission, otherwise it will not be visible. Now we select the outer eye, and one more thing we need to do is to plug some value to thickness. We will bring in value node and plug this into thickness, and it will fix a few things, as you can see. And now our eye is looking a lot more like realistic eye. So this is all for this lesson, and now it's time for quick questions. So the first question: how do you move, scale, or rotate the texture mask in stencil mapping mode? So when you have a texture map and you are in stencil mapping mode, you can control the texture by holding down Alt and dragging with right mouse button. And while holding down Alt and Control, you can rotate the texture mask by dragging the right mouse button, so it's always right mouse button. By holding down Alt plus Shift and right mouse button, you can scale it. The next question: how did we separate the roughness map for the eyebrows? So we use the color ramp to separate the texture for the eyebrows. While it looks simple, it's one of the most powerful tools in Blender Shading Editor. You can see the skin texture is looking like this. There is a lot of detail, but by sliding these handles, you can separate, exaggerate, remove a lot of details. And we used it to separate the eyebrows texture, as you can see here. So the next question is also very important. What are the steps to create the glass-like material that we created for the outer eye? And I learned the name is the cornea or cornea. So there are a few steps. First of all, you need to create a brand new material with the principled BSDF node, and then you increase the transmission to 1. Next, you bring down the roughness value. Next, you change the refraction value. We brought it down to. Another thing you need to do is to add value node to the thickness. The next thing is to make sure that you have enabled ray tracing in Eevee. And more importantly, in the material settings, you need to come here in render method. You should turn on ray trace transmission. So these are the main steps. So that was all for this lesson. I hope to see you in the next video. In this lesson, we are going to paint the textures for the clothes of our character. So let's go to texture paint. With the shirt, Alt Q, and the shirt is already active. You can activate by pressing Alt Q. We are painting on clothes color, which is what we want. And for this, I'm going to use a texture, not a texture mask. Let's bring in a fabric texture. I have prepared these 3 textures for the 3 parts of the clothes, the white fabric for shirt, the jeans, and this one for the shoes. For now, we will use this fabric texture. We need to paint with the white color. We will have the ability to change the color in the future. Let's change the mapping to tiled. Let's paint and see how it will look. Also, we need to change a few things here. First of all, in the fall off options, I'll turn off normal fall off. In options, we'll turn off these features, and we will be able to paint through this shirt and paint all parts at the same time, like this, for example. You can see I'm painting through the shirt. We will scale the texture from here too, so that the texture detail is much smaller. Now we can fix a few areas where the texture looks stretched, and while doing that I'll turn these back on. We can save the texture, Alt Q to switch to the trousers. Now let's bring in a different texture. This time it's a jeans texture. Again, we will paint with white color. We will turn these off temporarily. Let's start painting. Pay attention to the texture scale. Make sure it's not too small. Now we can fix some stretch. Before that, let's turn these back on. Maybe change the size to 2 and come closer. Don't forget to save the texture. Go to edit mode and select this area. If you don't know how to select, I'll show you. Switch to face select mode, select these faces. As you can see, Control plus, Control 7 to look from the bottom. Shift select this, Control Shift select this, and you have selected the bottom part of the shoes. Go out of edit mode. And in texture paint you can isolate this area, and we paint this area to white. Let's fill it with white color. Go back to edit mode. You can press Ctrl I to invert the selection. Go back to texture paint mode. Now we isolated this part. As you can see, we can paint on this part, but it will not be jeans, it will be a different texture. Let's bring in a different texture. I brought this red texture. We will see how this will look. I kind of like this red seamless texture, and I thought it would look okay on the shoes. We will see. You can also tint the colors of these textures by filling them with a different color with this fill tool. Let's select, for example, darker blue and bring down the strength of fill tool to 0.2. Select the jeans and fill it with this color. As you can see, the jeans got slightly darker, so I'll make it even darker. Let's see how this will look. Much darker jeans. For the shirt, I don't know, maybe I will make it a bit more yellow or something. I hope this will look a bit softer and nicer than pure white. Save the textures, go back to shading and see how this will look. Before setting up the material, I'd like to show you something that I did but didn't record at that moment. I simply removed the curvature information from the shirt. It was a very simple process. Go to texture paint, select the clothes curvature, switch to the shirt, not the jeans, Alt Q to the shirt, change to fill tool, come here and Shift X to sample average darker gray color and simply fill with 100% strength. And you won't have any highlights on the final material of the shirt, so I just didn't like the highlights very much, that's why I removed it, but you can keep it if you want. It's totally up to you. Let's go to shading now and set up the material. It's quite simple. We will use clothes color information as the bump texture. we can use that. So bring in color ramp first, plug this through color ramp, bring in bump node. We can connect the normal map through bump, so there is no problem here. And we can use the information from the clothes color through the color ramp. We convert the color to black and white information, and we plug this into height of the bump node. And this way we will have very nice surface imperfections. As you can see here, I'll show you. I will remove the bump information. It's too plain and boring. If you plug this into height of the bump map, you can see, bring up the roughness to 0.96 or something. Now we can use these textures to enhance the overall detail of the material. We combine them using mix color node, Shift A, mix color. We can use multiply blending mode. We need another one. Let's plug this and the color information to the next socket. Multiply, and now this will be our base color. As you can see, we can increase these factors just like that. We can play the factor, or we can run them through color ramp, Shift A. We change the colors here just like that, and you can see these darker areas and the highlights. So this is our final setup. It's very simple. You can tweak it, you can add more nodes to make the material look more beautiful, but we will keep it like this. It's already looking nice. I think we will bake all this information into a simple texture, but we will do that later. So we have painted the textures and set up the material for the clothes. Now it's time for quick questions. So let's start the questions. How do you tint the painted texture? Well, in order to tint the painted texture like the shirt here, you can select a color, you change to fill tool, and then you bring down the strength depending on how much tint you want to apply, and fill the texture with that color, and you start to tint the color. How did we combine the textures for the final material? Well, for combining different textures or different colors, we normally use the mix color node, and you can change the blending mode to fit your desired result. How did we remove the curvature effect from only the shirt? It's not difficult. You simply select the curvature map and go to texture paint. Select the mesh that you don't want to apply curvature effect, for example the shirt. Make sure you are painting on curvature map, and you fill this curvature map with plain color, but you don't fill it in 2D space. Otherwise you fill the entire image. You only need this image to select the color by pressing Shift X, and you fill the curvature. That way you remove the effect of the curvature map. So that was all for this lesson. See you in the next one. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to create an amazing hair shader, which looks like this. So it looks great. We're going to learn how to do that. Just take a look at the material setup. If you're not very experienced in creating complex materials like these, don't worry. You don't have to remember anything here. You can simply copy this material. But of course I will be explaining what is doing what. In order for this hair to look this good, we need to enable ray tracing in Eevee settings. If you don't enable that, it might look strange. Now let's go and create a new material. I'm actually not going to delete this. I'm going to create a new material, call it hair, And what's good about this material list, it's you can easily switch between these materials. If you move the material to top, it will be default. If you move to bottom, the first material will be default. Here we can also look at the material settings very quickly. We can switch between them and look at them as a reference and copy some nodes if we want. If you want to create it from scratch, you can create that, or you can download this file, you can copy the shader and work like this. It's totally up to you. So first of all, we are going to create the specular highlights which follow the camera movement, as you can see here. These highlights, we are going to create that because this is the base of everything here. And in order to create that, the most important node is gradient node. Shift A, gradient texture node. Control Shift click to see what it's doing. It's not doing great on its own now, and we're not going to be using Principled BSDF for some time. So now by default, gradient texture is using generated coordinates. We need to use UV coordinates. Shift A, coordinate, texture coordinate, and we need to plug in UV. And now you might be wondering how this curve can have a UV, but actually all these curves have default UVs. And if you really want to see that, we can convert this into a mesh. And if you go here to mesh data properties, you have the UV map. So we will go back, Control Z. So with Control Z, we go back because we don't want to destroy our curves. The way we create the highlights is by using the black and white color. For that, let's bring in color ramp, increase the black values, and you can see. But now we only have black and white. We need another black here, to create a highlight. You can see the highlight. But the problem is it doesn't move relative to the camera. And now we're going to deal with a little complex node, which is called vector transform. Shift A, transform. We need to use vector transform. So vector transform can help us transform values from one system to another. And you don't have to understand it very well because I don't understand it very well either. So let's go. From world coordinates, we change to camera because we are going to use camera movement as the driving factor of the UV coordinates. So here we bring all these numbers to 0 and change Z to 1. It's actually Z, and you can separate each of them or join them. There are nodes for that. Shift A, separate X, Y, Z. You can separate any value from it, for example X or whatever you want, and it will be single value. Here it is vector, 3 numbers combined, but you can separate each numbers individually and use them as single value. And the UVs are 2 numbers, X and Y, so Shift A, we can separate that too. And we can actually change the information about that. Let's bring in, for example, math node. We can change the number, this is X, and we can move the X, as you can see. Y, we move the UV coordinate along Y axis, but this is not what we want, as you can see. So we will move it along X axis. But we are not going to move it manually like this. We will use camera coordinates and the camera Z value. So let's plug Z into the value. Now, as you can see, we are moving it. The movement looks like it's inverted. If we go down, the highlights will go up. If we go up, the highlights will go down. This might be what you want, but if you want to change, you need to change the calculation from add to subtract. And now if you go up, it goes up. If you go down, it goes down. And you can actually change the speed. Let's use another math node, which is multiply. And immediately you can see the speed is decreased because we are multiplying the value by half. So that's why it decreased. If we decrease this value, it's even slower. If we increase the value, it's much faster. But 0.5 is a good middle ground, so we will keep that. And if you want to move the color, I think you know what to do. You can move them from here. You can make it larger, smaller. Well, this is a nice achievement, but that's not all. It's quite different from the hair that we have here. What we can do is to introduce noise. Shift A, noise texture. We can use the UV values here and see what the noise is doing. And we can stretch this noise along y-axis of the UV. So I will show you how to do that. So let's plug this UV and we can check what they do. We can plug X. This is not what we want. We can plug Y and you can see this is. Now we can exaggerate the effect by using another color ramp. We can bring the dark and white values together to increase the contrast. And we can increase the details too by changing the scale factor. So now we have this 2 value. We don't have to use this color ramp right now. We can use this noise and we can mix this black and white information with this black and white information. As you can see, this is only the Y value. This is the full value. We can mix it here with mix color. Plug it here. Plug this one to B. And now you can see we mix this information. We can play with this blending mode. For example, we can change it from mix to multiply. But what I learned is this linear light option, which mixes these 2 values much better, as you can see here. 0.4 is fine, I guess. You can shrink the specular highlights in here. So we're pretty much done. We have done the most difficult parts. Now everything else is quite easy. Now we can plug this through this Principled BSDF and change a few things here. First of all, I'd like to create those transparent areas. Let's look at the example. Here the hair is transparent around the tip. So let's create that. We already have the effect. We can use this effect. For example, I can duplicate this, plug this into here, and plug the color to alpha. And I can change the values here. I can remove one of the colors. And as you can see, I created the transparent areas. But the problem is it moves with the camera. We need a version of this which doesn't move with the camera. So this is not what we're going to do. We will create it from scratch again. We will have a gradient texture. We will use texture coordinate and the UV option, another color ramp, and see what it's doing. Increase the blacks. Actually, we need to invert it because dark values here, which will be 0 and transparent. So just like that, and we will need the noise texture. We can copy this noise texture. We will mix the Y value with the UV itself. So let's separate Y value first. Shift A, separate X, Y, Z, plug the UV, separate Y, see what's doing, and we will mix it back again. Shift A, mix color. Let's see what it's doing now. We will mix these 2. And as you can see, we have the effect here. Now we can bring it back. We need to change this to a linear light and move the factor here. Now the hair strands look too thick, so we can fine-tune that by changing a few things in the noise. A really easy way is to increase the distortion to, for example, 4, increase the detail to 4, and we probably need to bring down this factor to 0.2 or something. We can have more distortion. This is looking nice, I guess. And now we can plug this information into the alpha socket. We have these transparent tips of hair. Now we need to change the color and a few other things. And a really nice trick that I learned is to give metallic value. If we increase metallic, you can see it looks much nicer. Well, this doesn't have to be uniform. We can use a noise texture to change this value. Let's move these nodes back a little. And let's actually introduce some color variation. Shift A, again, mix RGB. We will use it as a factor between 2 colors. And now you can change it however you want, right? Now, as I mentioned, we can change the metallic. Let's plug this into metallic and see what it's doing. In order to have more metallic, we need to have more white parts. So let's see how it looks now. Ramp and see how, yeah, we actually have more white here. We can introduce more white like this too. Maybe slightly like this, more white and more metallic. If we introduce even more, we can see it's completely metal. Now we are going somewhere, and here we will do a little trick. We will mix this color by itself. Let's go and plug this into the factor. We will mix these two by itself, Shift D, and let's see the result. It's slightly darker. So now as a factor, we will use this value. Nothing changed because both of them are the same, but we can change the color in one of them, just like that. Or we can change it using a hue saturation value node. Shift A, hue saturation value. Now we can change the value here, or hue. I kind of like this color. So we're almost done actually. The only thing that's missing here is the small details. If you look at this hair, it's very detailed, and we can create this effect using bump node. So let's bring in a bump node, Shift A, bump. And for the bump value, we will use this noise. So let's use this information as height and plug the normal to normal. And here we go, we have those details. So yeah, we're done. We can tweak it a bit further, for example, by changing the saturation to increase the saturation on one of the colors. Not like that, maybe, I don't know, you can change it and see what you like. Not too much saturation, maybe 0.4. And also the index of refraction value here, we can bring it down to 1 to remove some highlights. We can increase roughness a little, not too much, maybe 72 or something. And the detail here is a bit too large than this. It's too fine, but I kind of like this. It looks a bit more stylized. So that's it. We created very nice hair shader for our beautiful character. And now it's time for quick questions. The questions for this lesson are quite simple. The first question: which two nodes were central in creating the moving highlights on the hair? So the two key nodes were the gradient texture node and the vector transform node. What does the separate XYZ node do? Well, it does what it says. It separates the vector numbers into individual values, and you can control each of them separately. And the last question: which coordinate system did we use for correct hair direction? Well, for the shader we mostly used UV coordinates because the curves have default UVs. So that was all for this lesson. I'll see you soon. In this lesson, we're going to enhance and finalize the texturing and shading process. Well, we need to do a few things before moving on to the next step. And we also forgot to paint the nails. So I think we probably start with painting the nails. It's pretty easy. Let's go to texture paint, switch to arms if you haven't already, and go to edit mode. I actually selected the nails. As you can see here, it's pretty easy. You can select one of them and hold down Ctrl Shift and select another face in a diagonal direction, and Blender will select everything in a square shape. Ctrl Z a few times to go back to the previous selection. I will probably select more faces, Alt and Shift, and select this loop. Now go out of edit mode and enable this mask option. Select the brightest option in our color palette, go to the fill tool and fill these areas. Go back to shading and take a look. I think there are a few things we can do. We need to paint some areas and remove some areas. Let's go to texture paint again, disable the mask option, Shift spacebar to bring up the brushes. I think we need to use Paint Hard. If you hold down Control, you can temporarily switch to the second color, and it feels like you are erasing the paint, but actually you're painting with the second color when you hold down Alt. So we will paint everything else just like that. And the next thing we're going to do is to apply subsurface scattering function to the skin material. Currently it looks like it's made of plastic or some sort of hard material. So for subsurface scattering, you need to come to the Principled BSDF, open the subsurface options, and give full weight. And as you can see, the skin now looks much softer. And it looks more noticeable when you cast some light. So let's go to rendered view. Actually, we can render in Eevee. Shift A to bring a light. Shift B to focus on the arms. I'll show this without subsurface scattering. This looks very dry here, and if I increase subsurface scattering, this is what it is doing. You can also tweak the radius and scale to your liking, but I think the default option is working okay. So the next thing we can do is to bake some information that we created using nodes onto image textures, and that way we can paint on that to give extra details. For example, on the skin, we don't have a roughness map. If you look here, we are using the color information and plugging this into color ramp in order to convert the colors to black and white information. And as you can see, it's mostly grayscale color with only white areas for the eyebrows. So this entire map is actually used only for the eyebrows, and we can bake this information, paint on it, and get more effects. For example, the nails should be shinier, but we don't see the shininess on the nails. And if we convert this into an image texture by baking, we could be able to paint the nails with the necessary color. So Shift A, emission. You know how to bake. I'm not going to do this process for all other materials because it's just the same process. We have learned how to bake node setups onto image textures. There were a few lessons on baking. If you haven't watched, please watch those videos. Now let's choose cycles from render properties. Come down to baking, bake type emit, but I think we forgot to create a texture. It will be called body roughness. It can be 1K. We also need to select the objects which are using the same material, select the texture, and then hit bake. Now we can check the texture by opening an image editor window here. So this is the roughness map. As you can see, we have these white areas for the eyebrows. I think it's too pixelated. Texture is too small. We can create a new texture. We specify it to 2K. This will be much better. Let's bake again. We've baked the 2K map and it's much better and higher resolution, as you can see here. Now we can go to texture paint, select the necessary roughness map. We can switch to the arm, go to edit mode. The nails are already selected for us. Let's isolate them with this mask option and fill it with much darker color. Now we will fill with this color. I think this dark gray will be enough. We have these artifacts. Let's do it again. Now we have, since this is only for the roughness map, we don't have to do anything else, and go back to shading, plug in the roughness map, come closer to the nails, and now they are much shinier, as you can see here. You can paint other details on the face on the roughness map to get the desired result. So it's totally up to you. This way we got rid of these extra nodes and we only have these maps. And don't forget to save these images externally. So that was all I wanted to do in this lesson. Now it's a challenge for you. Please inspect the materials of your character, paint any details, fix any errors, and bake all the information onto separate textures. Name the textures correctly, like body color, body roughness, body normal, etc., or clothes normal, clothes color, clothes roughness. And you know how to do that. You simply need to bring in an emission node, plug the information through emission node, create a texture for that, and bake the emission information onto the texture. Remove all the extra nodes and plug the newly created texture. You can even paint on the texture. So please do all that. That's a good challenge for you, and share your work on our Discord community server. You can find the Discord link in the resources section of the last video in this course. See you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to learn how to pack and unpack textures. This is really important when you're working with textures a lot, just like in our project. First, we will talk about what it is and why it's important. So, packing textures essentially means embedding the textures inside the blend file. So, making all the textures and other things as one file inside .blend file. And unpacking is the opposite. It's extracting the images and saving them separately as separate image files. So you do this by coming here to File menu and External Data. You pack resources and unpack resource. These are the two most common options here. Now, why is it so important? You probably already know why it's important. It's simply important because when you send your blend file to someone, you're going to lose the textures, and you will see the bright pink color instead of a texture. So let's test that. For example, shading. We will create a texture, Shift A. You can call it anything. You plug this in and you have this completely black texture. Let's save it. I'm saving it on my desktop. Let's save our project. Again, I'm going to save the project on my desktop. Let's quit Blender. Remember, I haven't packed the textures, which means I haven't embedded this texture into this blend file. So if I send this blend file, you're going to lose the texture. It's simply because the link is broken. This blend file is referencing to the texture just next to it. And when you send this blend file online, for example, you'll lose the link. They don't have this texture. It's also important when you are not even sending this, because you might want to move the textures from place to place, and then if you open your blend file, you suddenly lose the texture and you see this pink color. You check the material and your texture seems like it's plugged in, but you don't see the texture here, right? Because again, the link is simply broken. That's why packing is quite important. Now let's bring the texture back, Ctrl X, bring it back. Now we can come here and reload. We have the texture back, and I'm going to use another texture. This time I'm going to use an external texture. Again, on my desktop, folder 1, this texture, as you can see it here. And I haven't packed the textures yet. You can see this folder icon, which means these are external, these are not packed. And you can see here that my blend file is currently 563 kilobytes. Now let's pack the textures. File, External Data, Pack Resources, Pack to Files. Let's save the project. And one good sign that your texture is packed is this icon. Now, instead of a folder icon, you have this, I don't know, maybe a library icon or something. This means that the textures are right inside this blend file. You can also check the file size here. File was 500 something kilobytes. Now it's over 1 megabyte. Now you can even delete the textures. You don't have to worry about that. You can delete this texture. You can save the project. You can close the project. You can open it again. You still have these textures because these are embedded inside this blend file. And now let's talk about how to unpack and why it can be important. You can unpack the textures by clicking on these buttons, but you can unpack everything at once, all the textures from all materials at once by coming here, File, External Data, and Unpack Resources. So why is it important? Why can it be so important? It's important because this way you can collect all your textures in one folder. For these two textures, it's not quite important because you only have these two textures. But if your project is very large and you have dozens of textures, I don't know, maybe 50, 70 textures, and you have all your textures scattered all around your computer, sometimes you lose them, sometimes you find them, right? So you need to keep all of them in one folder. So the steps are, first, you go open your project, you check all materials, you make sure that all your textures are okay, they are showing up, you have them here. And the first step is you pack the textures first. You keep all the textures right inside the blend file. And the next step is to unpack them. So now we will do that step, External Data, Unpack. And you normally select the first option, which will create a folder called Textures right next to your project file, and unpack or extract all the textures inside that folder. So let's check that, save your project, and you can see the folders changed back to the folder icon, these icons, right? You come here to your desktop and you see next to your project file, you have the textures folder and you have these textures back here. This way you can collect all the textures from around the computer to one folder. Now we're going to do the same with our character project because I also saved them in random places sometimes. So let's collect all of those textures, keep them in one folder. So this is my character file. I'm going to make sure that I have all the textures, no problem with nothing, right? Let's hide this, for example. Let's see if we have everything painted. You don't have to move the project file now. You just need to pack the textures first. Let's come here, File, External Data, Pack Resources. Let's select that. And it complained that it couldn't find one default JPEG file, but it's okay because all our materials were fine. We saw all the textures. Now you can check the size of the project. It should have increased. Now I have moved the character file into a folder called Character on my desktop. I only have this one blend file and all the textures are inside this blend file because we packed them. Now we will open this file and unpack all the textures. Let's hit unpack, use files in current directory. Let's go ahead and do that. Save the project, close the project. Now you can see you have this project file and the folder called textures, and you have all the textures inside this folder. And as a bonus step, you can come here to File and Clean Up. You can purge unused data. You can see we don't have much data because I think I purged them before. You have only one image to get rid of, so let's delete that. Now it's time for quick questions. Well, the questions are not very difficult, I think. Why is packing important? You probably already know it's really important for safety so that you don't lose your textures when you are moving files around, when you delete files, when you send your project to someone, or when you upload it on the internet. So you simply pack the textures so that you never lose them. The next question. When do you think you might break the link and lose your textures? In what occasions? Normally, you don't lose your textures when you move the blend file. So you can move the blend file from place to place, but you normally keep the textures. But when you move the textures, when you delete them or move them from folder to folder, you lose the link and lose your textures. The last question, why do you think we should unpack textures? Can't we keep them packed all the time? Well, we can keep them packed all the time. We don't have to always unpack them. But it's better for organization, first of all. Secondly, when you want to export your blend file into another program, for example, a game engine, they might simply ignore the textures and import the blend file itself. The project files itself, I mean the 3D meshes, animations, etc. So you normally keep the textures separately and plug them separately inside that game engine or a different program. Also, when you want to export your blend file into a different file, for example FBX, OBJ, etc., it's better to keep textures separate. Well, that's all for this lesson. See you in the next one.